All right, in this section, we will discuss the process of uploading or depositing a single work to a Hyku tenant. There's also the option to upload works in bulk, which we will discuss in a later section. So by default, registered users can deposit works. Every repository has the option to either allow direct deposit, in which case anyone who has the permission to deposit a work can do so directly, and it will immediately show up on the repository at the level of visibility set by that depositor, or set up a mediated deposit, which means that the depositors who have permission to upload works still have to have that work approved by somebody with approval permission, like an admin, before it will show up at any level of visibility on the tenant. Independent of that setting, there is, by default, an upload button on the front page to share your work. It'll show up in a slightly different position and different prominence based on which theme you have. But every theme has it enabled by default, and so you can turn that on or off in the features. But that's a share your work button on this homepage. So even a user who's not logged in, publicly browsing, would see this. If they're not logged in, it will take them to the login screen to log in with their user account. And so if they're a user who does have permission to upload, then they would be able to upload. If not, then it would take them to, they would be logged in, but still would not be able to deposit a work. So that takes you there, and that's the same upload screen that you'll see if you go from the dashboard once you're already logged in. There is a section in the dashboard, waiting for this to load, called Works, where you can see your works that have been deposited. Then with this tab here, all works that have been deposited, and you have the option to create a batch of works or add a new work. Just briefly, create a batch of works is not the same thing as bulk importing. And what this is giving you the option to do, and it's rarely advisable, is to bring in multiple files with identical metadata and bring them in simultaneously together as one work. You actually already have that function under simply add a single new work, just add multiple files to it, and that's probably the standard way to go. But so to add a new work, you would select your work type. Each of these defines the metadata that work will be accorded to. So for our purposes, we'll look at a generic work. And when you're adding a single new work, it will bring up these three tabs. And there's, if you look here, you can see there's sort of a minimal set of requirements before you can add a new work. So first you have to fill in any required metadata fields. The required ones are labeled as such here. And then there are additional fields sort of below the fold. If you tag that button, it'll toggle those on, and you can use as many of these as you want, but only these required fields are necessary to deposit a work. In this second tab is where you can add the files or add an entire folder of files. You can also drag files here and they will upload. And then in this relationships tab, you'll see that every work that's deposited has to be deposited through an administrative set. By default, every tenant has its own default admin set. The admin set defines the rules around the depositing of that work. So for instance, that's where you would set whether it is a mediated deposit or a direct deposit. In addition, if you want to, you can deposit a work into a collection at the time that you're uploading it. This will pull up a search, and this will match full terms, not partial terms. So if I just type in a string of characters, there's no matches, but if I can match it to an entire word that occurs within one of those collections, then it'll come up in the dropdown and I can select it. And then selecting it is not sufficient to get this work to be added to it. I would have to actually add it, and now this work will be added to it when I upload it. You also have to choose a level of visibility when you add a work. By default, it's private, meaning only the user who uploads it can see it. You can set embargoes or leases here, set an institutional visibility, which is defined as any user who has login credentials on this Hyku repository. And then public will make it visible to any public user who navigates to it online. And then finally, you have to indicate that you have read the deposit agreement and agree to it. And then it's telling me I have not added a file or described my work, but if I had done that, then I would be able to save this and this would be uploaded as a work. If this was a direct deposit admin set, then it would immediately publish. Otherwise, it would go to a review submissions queue for someone with approval permissions to approve that work. Once a work has been added, it will show up in this works tab of the dashboard. And from here, in fact, if I click on this, you can see this is what the approval band looks like. It just shows up over the work. Since I'm an administrator, I can see that. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be able to see it. And here it's already been approved, but with a new work, you'd have the option to approve it, to send it back with comment, or to request changes of the person who had deposited it. And then you could submit that instruction there. You see, I can, after a work has been uploaded, I have the option to add it to one or multiple collections here. I can toggle on or off whether it's featured, and then I can go in and edit the metadata again, and it looks essentially like adding, once I go in and edit that. As a little quirk of our system, and we'll see this as soon as this finishes loading, but as a little quirk of our system, when you go to edit a work, all of the metadata fields repeat. And so you'll see two instances of each field. Normally, if you're adding a work and you toggle on an additional metadata field, the system won't let you save it in that condition. Each metadata field that you duplicate has to have content. But as part of this quirk, when you're editing a work, you're so close. When you're editing a work, each of those fields duplicate, but the system treats them as though they are not duplicated. So it just timed out on me, so that's great. So I will skip over editing a work at the moment and jump to one last thing about depositing an individual work. As I said at the top, each work is comprised of multiple, or potentially of multiple files. It's a minimum of one file, and you can have multiple files that comprise a work. And you can adjust the settings for each of those files within the work with a file manager. Well, here you can see each of those fields is duplicated, but you can make changes, and then you'd be able to save those changes there. Within the work. So I guess so go to this work and see here are the files that comprise it. I can edit these files, and in fact, you can upload an additional or newer version of a work. You can change the permissions around the files within a work, and even change the name of the file as it will appear in this file listing on the item view page. But the fact that files function independently of the works that they are part of opens a few possibilities. And so, for example, you can contribute a file to Hyku at a public visibility, and then change the work visibility to institutional or private, so that you can use that file for some functions within the system, such as using it as a thumbnail for a collection. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But you can also do the opposite and set a file permission only to institutional or private and keep the work at a public. And that's a way to have the metadata about a work, or the metadata public and visible, but the file itself is not technically published. And so that allows some customization there. But at this point, if anyone has questions about depositing individual works or any of the settings within that, we can talk about that and then move on to the next section afterward.
So we have a question in the chat from Sherry. I'll go ahead and read it. Is the default admin set for the repository level, or can there be a different default admin set for each work type? Or maybe a default admin set tied to a group of users? That might be a little bit more advanced than we wanted to get into this section, but I'll go ahead and open that up.
Well, there is no way to tie each work type only to a certain admin set. So I can answer that question. Admin sets always function across the entire repository, but what you can do is change which users have permission to deposit through specific admin sets. So if you know you'll have faculty contributors, you can only allow them to deposit through a faculty admin set, and then set the permissions on that to, for instance, mediated deposit, and then have another admin set that's for, say, library professionals who can deposit directly and don't need approval. So you can tailor it at that level, but you can't tailor only specific works or work types through those admin sets, if that makes sense.
Yeah, hi, this is Sherry. I was just going to, because my use case would be for ETDs, for example, we may want the graduate students to go through a review process first, but normal faculty work's not. So I guess in our case, we would be needing to set possibly group permissions for those graduate students to use a particular admin set if we wanted that to be mediated.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Can I get in for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Nick and I have been playing around with it a little bit as I've been kicking the tires. And one thing that we've got is we have a prior existing institutional repository with something like 20,000 records in it. And rather than uploading the files to Hyku and immediately starting to overtax the file storage capabilities, Nick put together a nifty, neat little placeholder file that we can put in so that we don't do that. We rely on the link out to where the file exists already.
Yes, so that's a sort of a workaround that we've come up with things that either if you want to describe an entire website and use that as a work, or again, if you have works that already live elsewhere on the internet. By default, when you upload a work, Hyku insists that you include a file with it. That's one of the requirements to publish. So we've created, and you can find this in the document section in the Basecamp, sort of a generic placeholder PDF that just says the work that's being described in this, or the work that's being described here is available through the related URL in the metadata. So follow that. So you can upload it with that PDF and keep that PDF there. You can also upload any file to initially get the work created, and then you can either set that file to private or even go in and delete the file, but not the work itself. And Hyku is fine with a work that does not have a file associated with it. It just won't let you initially create it that way. So if you go in and delete the file, then you just have the metadata profile. So that's a way to step around either copyright issues or trying to link something that's not actually a file, like an interactive exhibit or a website, something like that.
Okay, thanks. In the interest of time, I think we should go ahead and move on. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.